Thank you very much for joining today. Our live stream is titled Distributed Circularity, and the idea is for us to show how we can use technology to best create that circular supply chain. My name is Mike Boyle, and I am very happy to have you join us today, and I'm extremely happy about our cast of panelists. Let me go ahead and show you who we have in store. First, we start with Andreas Opelt, who is on the board of directors and CMO of Saubermacher AG. And then we'll be following it with Katarina Serena, who is a digital circular economy expert coming from the private sector, dealing with a number of public projects as well, and is an industry advisor. And then lastly, we'll be following it with Michael Shea, who is the managing director of the Dingle Group and co-chair of Sovereign Foundation's SSI and IoT Working Group. So without further ado, let me go ahead and bring Andreas to the stage. Andreas, thank you very much for joining. And what I'd like to do, Andreas, is start with a picture that was taken this morning. And this was truly inspiration for me. I was walking on my way. Sorry, if you could just take yourself off mute, Andreas. I was on my way coming to my office, thank you. And I saw this picture. And a number of you, especially if you're living in Vienna, this will not look too surprising. This is supposed to be for old, unused paper. And as you can see, those elements over on the right, left-hand side are not paper. And so I know that a lot of what you deal with, Andreas, is specifically tied to these types of situations. And I thought it was quite interesting before we got ready for this webinar, this live stream. A few weeks ago, we had a talk and you mentioned, well, you know what, I don't necessarily come from the waste disposal area. I'm actually coming from IT. And I thought it was a great example to go ahead and show how we try to get people to follow processes where actually we can go ahead and automate all of this, right? And so I'd be curious to get your opinion on what we're currently doing today in managing the waste and how can we do it better?
Thank you, Mike. Yes, that's of course an interesting topic, how technology might push us to the next level in waste management. And that's exactly what I will share some thoughts about. I will talk about 3 examples where you can see maybe some videos in the background. The first example is the waste scanner, where we tackle the problem that you just pointed out, Mike, where we currently produce a lot of waste and our separation quality is not as good as we think. Yes, your picture shown that quite nicely. So what we have done in the back of a truck, we mounted some technology, some lighting and some scanning cameras, and we can classify the pile of waste from your waste bin and then provide a feedback to you. So providing feedback, and maybe with the positive aspect of nudging, we have seen in some pilot projects that this changes the behavior of many people significantly. Currently, we don't have any feedback. All 5 years, you have a very unspecific waste separation measurement that's published in the newspaper, and that's it. So we think that there are new technologies offering new ways on communication, like the waste scanner that I have shown now. And this combines sensoric and artificial intelligence. But that's not just it. When you look at your glass bin, for example, then you see different pictures. The one is that some of these bins are quite empty when they are emptied by our trucks. Some of them are overfilled. So you bring your glass there and still there is a lot of glass already around your bin, and you go home and are disappointed and maybe even throw your glass into a paper bin, as we have shown before. So we want to have a new solution here which increases efficiency and increases more or less transparency. And this is something where we use technology that have not been used in the past in that area. In the past, we were just going static tours, and now we have sensors, filling sensors in the bins, and these filling sensors provide, of course, the filling level, which sounds easy, but it's not so easy to get a robust sensor technology in such a bin that has enough efficiency. So what we do then, we provide this sensor data to artificial intelligence, to an algorithm, which tries to solve this complicated traveler salesman problem. And for those of you who work with algorithms, traveler salesman problem is NP complex. If you add filling levels, driving hours, and some restrictions to it, it's even getting more complex. But technology nowadays is on a level that we can create a lot better tours than we could do on the traditional way, where the driver created these tours on his personal experience that he gained over years, or even sometimes over decades. So again, we allow 15–20% more efficient collection. That means less CO2 production by our truck, together with our partners, using technology in the bin, but also using technology for algorithm optimization. And then, of course, the driver needs a tablet in his vehicle as such, because his tour looks different every morning. And this is maybe, yeah.
I was just going to say, I thought it was quite interesting, just as a quick aside from my end, how you're able to go ahead and link the actual content of what we put the focus on with the routing. So you were talking about the logistics, and I thought it was quite interesting of how you were able to actually go ahead and link these two components.
Yes, and there are 20 different parameters that we need to feed to this cost function in the algorithm. And it's traveler salesman problem is solved by computing power. So each time in this platform you press on create my tour, there are computers booted in, I don't know, Amazon somewhere. And a lot of computing power is fed into this algorithm that after an hour it can shut down again. These are also things that were not possible in that manner 10 years ago. So this helps a lot. And I have brought a third example.
Yes, you did.
And the third example is, if this waste, which you separated, very motivated by the waste scanner, which was collected efficiency based on new technology, if you bring it then to our sorting plants, also here a shift in technology is going on. You see here automated sorting robot that we already have in a trial in our sorting plant here in Graz, which allows you to do a lot more specific sorting without having a lot of manual labor included. And sometimes it's not just about manual labor that you need to pay. It's very hard, even for countries like Austria, to find people that do this work for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. It's not just about the cost. And here, when we think about our plants of the future, such robots will be an essential part of it, because we need more recycling, we need more sorting also in our plants, and this can be solved by technology. So these three things that I have shown is, first, we use technology to get your motivation up to do better sorting in the house, that your mixed residual waste doesn't contain so much misthrows, because currently in Austria we have 70% misthrow in our mixed residual waste. That's still a lot of potential. Then we do an algorithm-based dynamic routing. Currently we do this for glass or for textiles, but I think in the future this will increase to be also used for other waste types. And at the end, our plants get bigger, more industrialized, and also more relying on new technology like this robot that I have shown you, which is exactly the robot that we are currently using and testing. So that
Excellent.
was a brief overlook. I hope it gave you an impression what's going on here.
I certainly did. Thank you very much for that, Andreas. And we have a few comments coming from the audience. And obviously, we will go ahead and make sure, if you could stick around a little bit, we will have a panel discussion at the end. But I would like to go ahead and show one comment that came through that I thought was quite indicative. Very often when you're talking about the various technology, we're talking about end of pipe. So in other words, if we're trying to really solve this problem, it should have been solved by the time it actually gets to your neck of the woods. And so I think that the point that Michael has actually raised here, I think is quite poignant. So if I can ask you to stick around, Andreas, we'll start with a panel discussion in a few minutes' time. And thank you very much for very interesting description of some of the technology that you're using.
You're welcome.
Great. All right. So the second speaker is Katerina Serada, and she will be talking about Industry 4.0 and digital twins. So Katerina, thank you very much for joining today. And I thought it would be good for us to start off with a general description. I suspect that some people are not familiar with the term digital twin. Perhaps if you can go ahead and describe what that actually is. Oops, you are on mute.
So now I'm on.
Oh, there we go. We're in business. Yeah. Sorry. I should have gone ahead and unmuted you. Apologies for that.
No worries. Thank you for presentation. I would like to pick up on an earlier point that has been made by Andreas. And actually, yes, we have a problem with the waste prevention, and the circular economy that is focused on design and designing the waste out is actually seeking to address this problem. For the moment, I would like to address important statistical data that provided by the Cambridge University last year, that 90% of the raw materials used in manufacturing in Europe become waste before the product actually leaves the factory. And 80% of the products made in the EU are thrown away within 6 months after the user gets them. So basically, we do have the problem of the waste on all the stages, and we have to deal with this accordingly. And technology has a lot to do with that. So Industry 4.0 helps us to prevent waste, to design the things better, and to increase the efficiency of the products in materials that we are using. So starting from one of the promising technologies which can help us to build better supply chains and support our transition from linear to circular economy is digital twin, which is a virtual representation of the physical object, a process, or a system across its life cycle. And it uses real-time data and other sources to enable learning, reasoning, and dynamic calibration of the environment. So it's not only the replica, it's not only the static mirror of the object of the process, it's actually dynamic, which allows us to get the information about performance of the product, performance of the process, and get a better overview of the system which the product is connected to. It can be the response to the external shocks, physical shocks, shocks related to the change in the process and the use. So digital twin is an important technology and has been listed as one of the 15 important emerging technologies by the European industrial associations. So actually, digital twin allows us to provide value through visualization, analysis, prediction, and optimization. I would like to focus also on its use on all the stages on the product design and actually the system. So digital twin is not a new thing. For some time, it has been already used in automotive industry. It's actually used recently, and I would like to refer the audience to the really interesting report by DHL on the use of digital twins in service industries and logistics. So Finland, for example, is running the program on a digital twin for forest supply chains. They use the digital twin for the complete inventory of all the private forests in Finland. So there are many different applications and possibilities of the use of the digital twin, and the amount of data which we generate across the value chain now is allowing us to build really comprehensive, complete federated models to understand better the product, which becomes not only the expression of the material that is built of functionality, but actually it becomes a part of the wider system of the wider system of the use of the post-use and gives us a wider understanding of the data which we need to activate the circularity across the supply chain. A digital twin also help us to capture the value of the end-of-life product through the reverse logistics. So the uses and actually the functionality of digital twin is really multiple, and the future of this technology is really promising. However, I would like also to stress the importance of the digital twin as a complementary technology for digital passports, which become in the European Union quite a topic, and it will be basically an obligatory thing in a few years. Now, European Commission is tasked by European Parliament to develop the requirements and the standard for the digital passports. And of course, imagine that all the information that we need to have about the product will be contained in digital passport is really maybe not so realistic. What would be hardly to imagine in digital passport is the information about disassembling, the strategies for reuse, recycling. This is something that can be done at the level of the digital twin, which can provide us a better understanding of the design, redesign of the product, maintenance, and other characteristics that are related to the performance of the product and its post-life destiny, let's say. I hope I gave an explanation. So basically, we can talk about the digital twin not only on the level of the product, which becomes an interesting application, but also on the level of the process. So we can get a dynamic understanding of the process itself, which is really important for the supply chain, for allocation and real-time information about the resources, about the inventory. So the applications and the possible use of these technologies is really multiple. So as for the application for the resource use and maximization of the value, it's also really important technology, but gives us a better approach to eco-design, because it allows us to test the product before we actually start producing this in production lines. So basically, it gives us a better understanding of the possible breakdowns of the product, of the weak points, and we really get a better understanding of the possible scenarios and energy use and water use for producing this concrete team. As I mentioned before, the processes that will be initiated operated regarding the deconstruction, separation, and preparation of material for the reuse will be deployed for facilitating the information about the digital passport of the product. So examples, they actually quite wide, and I would like also to refer not only to those ones which have a direct relation to the technology, to the recycling stage, but also, for example, one of the projects that has been recently run at the pilot stage in Italy. It's digital twin is used to address the problem of the counterfeiting. So that the damage is put by the fake products within the supply chains is counted in billions. And if we produce the digital twin, which is a complementary technology for digital passport, we get a full overview of what is happening with the product, starting from the starting from the beginning of the supply chain and ending in the hands of the user. So digital twin is really indispensable on all the stages.
Thank you very much for that, Katerina. I just wanted to go ahead and share this comment coming from Sophia that where she wanted to express the positive comments tied to what you were talking about, specifically tied to digital twins and being a way for us to actually go ahead and solve a number of problems, which clearly is something that we're able to do much further in the process, much closer to the upstream in comparison to always concentrating on end of pipe, to piggyback on some of the things that Michael mentioned. So thank you very much, Katerina. If I can ask you to go stick around, we have a couple of questions, some specifically for you. And so I think we will go ahead and have a very interesting panel discussion. So thank you very much. And I would say, let's go ahead and move on to our third panelist. And that would be Michael Shea. Michael, thank you very much for joining.
Thank
and
you
I know that your specialty is tied to digital identity. Now, I'm not quite sure how many individuals are familiar with the term digital identity, but I think it's important to emphasize that we're not always just talking about human beings. So perhaps if you can give us a description of what digital identity is all about.
Yeah, so identity has three dimensions. There's identity of people, which is the usual thing that everyone falls to. But there's also identity of organizations. A organization, by definition, is a legal person, and there are identity of organizations, and then there's identity of things. Things can be broken down then to living things and non-living things. You can own a thing. So whether you have a dog or a cat, there are certain laws. You're not completely free to do whatever you want. Whereas if you have an electromechanical device, I can do whatever, legally I can do whatever I want with that. And so that's sort of the differences within the construct of a thing. You can't, there are different rules and potentially different regulations and laws that you're constrained by and have to operate under.
Did I understand that correctly? You cannot own dogs and cats, but you can own mice? Did I understand?
You can own dogs and cats, but you can't do, I could take a hammer to my magic mouse here, but and nothing would happen, right? But you can't do that with an animal, right? And so it's a subtle distinction, but it is a distinction that there are laws that you end up having to fall under.
You were able to go ahead and alleviate a lot of doubt that I had. So thank you very much for that insight, Michael. Perhaps if you can describe to us how the functionality of digital identity actually works within a circular supply chain, if the intention is to eliminate waste before it takes place. We have a number of questions coming in that direction, so I was happy to see that. But also making sure that, because we're not really talking about a circle, we're talking about an ecosystem. How does digital identity actually go ahead and help us and help facilitate that?
So digital identity is like the connective tissue or sort of a missing link in a lot of, I think that can provide a lot of value within the circular economy, the whole concept of circularity. One of the challenges that exists, so even as Katerina and Andreas were talking, whether you have digital twins or other, just straight waste management processes, the challenge you have is a lot of the information that exists within a digital twin, especially in a digital twin world, is actually controlled and retained by potentially the initial manufacturer of the product. Except the initial manufacturer may have lost control of the product because it was sold. Now, there's some big industrial products that they may have continual interaction through its life cycle, something like an aircraft engine that's big and complex. and in many times isn't actually ever purchased, but just leased. However, certainly in any consumer products, and probably the vast majority of products, once it's sold, it really leaves the purview or realm of sphere of control of the manufacturer. If the manufacturer, in some of the readings that I've done, particularly around circularity, if regulation or the rules of the market are modified such that the manufacturer continues to have some level of responsibility for the disposal or reuse or remanufacture of the components of that product, they need to know how to identify. And so this is where concepts like decentralized identity, where the using public key encryption and cryptography, you start to allow to be able to identify parts and be able to track that part through its life cycle. It allows things, distributed / decentralized concepts and constructs to be put into place, and allow the control, the sharing of information between all the different parties within an ecosystem. So within your circular ecosystem, Michael.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I have a number of questions that have come through. So what I'd like to do is bring back Katerina. I think, Andreas is back as well. Great. Thank you very much for joining us again. The first one I'd like to start off with, because I really do think this comes down to one of the big issues we have today, that companies believe that they buy resources and they can do whatever they want. And so Esther's asking you a question: why, if people buy and separate waste, they don't receive the 85% of the waste profit? And I think that's a very interesting concept, because we are assuming that this is tied to profit and loss. I'd leave it to anyone who would like to go ahead and take that one up. Maybe Andreas, you'd like to take on that question?
Yes. So if I understand the question correctly, it is if you do a proper waste separation, you don't get more commercial benefit than somebody else who does not do a good waste separation. So you don't have something from the profit if you do this manual work of waste separation. And I think that's a good and interesting aspect. In the past, it was not possible to do a digital measure system which could allow such a tariff model, which says if you do good separation, you have a lower tariff than if you do bad separation. But I think with new technology, these things can be possible in the next 5 to 10 years. Of course, it's a big change in the whole mindset, because this has to be changed by the tariff systems of the cities and villages. But I think it is possible, and I think it's beneficial if we would do that.
I think it's quite interesting that we're looking at this concept as being revenue generation, whereas in essence, if anything, we should be looking at cost minimization. And the real issue, and I'd be keen on your opinion, maybe get some others into the mix, we think that there are no costs involved to actually going ahead and disposing our waste, because the individuals or the companies who are responsible for actually producing the goods are not held responsible for actually going ahead and performing the cleanup. So perhaps, Katerina, I'd be keen on your opinion on how do we actually go ahead and manage the total cost of ownership? Because obviously these are costs that we are accruing in our society, but they're not very transparent, right?
Actually, yes, I agree with you, Michael. But the whole discussion on the ownership in a circular economy context, it's quite a complex issue, because what we are trying to build now is actually the service model economy. So to use less resources to produce a product that can be rather provided as a service. So we are rather cultivating something like a culture of the access. And coming back to the previous, I would like to also to pick up on the previous point, why
Sure.
we are not providing 85% of the profit. It's the whole concept of how waste is considered. As soon as we start considering waste as the resource, we start to put a value on it. So a value on it starts to be reflected in the balance sheet of the companies. So the relationship between then the consumer, which is receiving the product, or consumer in the B2B context or B2C context, is completely shifting. So we don't consider waste as waste anymore. Waste becomes a resource which has a value. So of course, it also changes our rationalization around the cost and the profit. So as soon as it is a resource, it has a value, it's a production input. So there is no discussion about waste as something that you have to make a profit on. Is rather a value that you so it's rather how we consider a waste in the context of the circular economy. We are gradually shifting from the concept of recycling and having waste there. It's rather preventing waste on the stage of the design. So I think that our understanding of waste in the concept of the circular economy will be changing, and it will give us better understanding and clarity how it has to be valorized and what would be the accounts of it on the balance sheet of the companies, and how we treat it in our society. So I think we will change it within the next maybe 10 years. I think it's rather a question of the bookkeeping, let's say, for the moment.
Oh, it would be a great segue to you, Michael, when we're talking about digital identity and we're talking about properties. So I would assume that these resources would also have a digital identity, right?
Yeah, I think that's part of where it again, with the changing of technology, is creating the possibility that we can actually track these and track them. I think particularly as they go out of spheres of control. Some industries have already started doing things like this. Or you get some sectors of the automotive industry where they do design their products for some degree of recycling or being taken apart end of life. But most industries don't deal with, are not in that area. So it's a big challenge. Also, quite frankly, a lot of them, the cost of the good may be so cheap that it's will add a significant cost into the whole manufacturing process or demanufacturing process. So being able to confidently know that, one, it is actually your part or your component that's been needs to be demanufactured, it will be a critical element. Otherwise, as Katerina was saying, if it's going on a balance sheet, you better be darn sure as to what you're actually putting on the balance sheet actually is, if you're listing it as an asset or a liability, that it really belongs to you.
There are thank you very much for that, Michael. There are a number of comments that are coming through, and I think I'd like to highlight some of them, make sure that we give our audience an opportunity to go ahead and be part of this conversation. First one's coming from Flavio, where he talks about responsibility for waste generation must be the product designer, which I think is quite interesting. Andreas, will be coming to you on this one. The consumer cannot be responsible for the product design. Andreas, from your perspective, what role does this concept actually play with that of what you're managing within your company?
Yes, I think that's the key of the better recycling rates, that we change in the product design our attitude, that it's not just about marketing, but it's also about end of life situation. We have good examples where, for example, if you take a plastic foil to cover something and you use a certain material, it can be perfectly recycled. If you glue together three different materials, it cannot be recycled in the future. So these are very simple tasks, actually, that should be reconsidered. And but there are good examples too. Sometimes with our consulting team, work with industry clients that over some years managed to reduce their waste production as such significantly, and also start packaging of their products differently and so on. And yes, this is the responsibility of the producers, not the consumer. And there's a lot of room for improvement there still.
Thank you very much for that, Andreas. Any other comments from you, Katerina, or perhaps from you, Michael? Nope.
No,
Okay.
I mean, I would agree. I agree with Flavio's statement there. I think that you can't. The consumer has a certain element, but really, if it's design of packaging, if it's design of the actual components, that they're using materials that can't be recycled, as Andreas has just talked about, the consumer has no control over that. So, completely agree. Yeah.
Well, I think it's quite fascinating actually, and I don't know if it's a law of gravity or whatever it may be, that if we have this case of input, process, output, and we keep thinking when we have bad output that we're going to get bad input and we're going to get good output, and I don't quite understand how that one's supposed to work.
So
and
the pun of garbage in, garbage out. Pardon the pun there.
Yeah. Right. True.
I would say
please go ahead, Katarina, please.
the consumer has certain power, because as soon as the market starts offering us the choice, and the choice can be the lack of the mono-use packaging, for example, you know that now there are these existing shops of the zero waste, so-called, where you can come with your own packaging material, you refill your thing. There are, like, World Economic Forum just recently was broadcasting a small business entrepreneurs, female business. They have been going with refill stations around the houses and just offering the product for the least price. There are certain ways to activate the consumer integrated into the deposit return schemes. So I would say that generic answer probably is not possible. It depends on the product. There was an interesting discussion with one of my LinkedIn contacts on the possibilities to have a sustainable packaging for Coca-Cola company and for other big producers. For me, it's a big question whether the mono-use packaging can be sustainable. As soon as we go to paper, any other material, the scale of production, the amount, and then merchandising policy to pack everything, basically raisins and one raisin in a separate package, doesn't create sustainability, whatever material you put in place. So I think that generic answer here is not really possible. I think that responsibility should be somehow a matter of the whole system and every stakeholder, and we can all play our part. But of course, I do agree with previous my colleagues that placing the responsibility on the place of the consumer is not the way. Depends on the good, depends on the product, depends on the market also, because we don't have the same recycling system in every market. This is also the problem for the big supply chains to arrange the deposit return schemes and proper recycling. So there are many problems that are related to the allocation of the productive networks along the presence of the in the markets of those products. Thank you.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. It looked as if we were able to get a bit of a response from some of our viewers here, where they obviously were hitting a raw nerve, where they feel that there's a certain responsibility that should take place upstream. In other words, the companies who are responsible for actually building these different components, putting together the products and the like, that they hold a certain responsibility. So that means that we're actually talking about some sort of change that needs to take place. And so I would like to go ahead and pose a question to all of you, and I leave it up to the individual who'd like to go ahead and get that one started. If we're looking at this model where we take from nature without giving back, we produce things that we may need, or perhaps we don't, and at the end we throw them away, we can clearly agree that there is some sort of system change that needs to take place here. Now, the question I would pose to all of you, looking at it from the realm of technology, as that is the focus of our conversation today, how can technology go ahead and help assist with that system change? Perhaps, Michael, if we could start with you, because I believe that tied to digital identity, one part of the digital identity is looking at components like the blockchain, looking at smart contracts, and ensuring that we are able to optimize that of what we currently have. So perhaps if you can describe from your perspective how you can see some of these parts actually coming together so that we could better facilitate that system change.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you an example, Michael. So I was advising a client a few years ago, and it was in the aviation industry in particular, and it was dealing with the maintenance and repair element. it's an ecosystem where it's big, it's complex. There's like 8 or 9 stakeholder roles, about 30 to 50,000 different manufacturers involved in that, from lessors who may own the aircraft, to operators, to manufacturers, and all of that. I think that the challenge with technology dealing with these things, in the aircraft world, when you have maintenance of an aircraft, a commercial aircraft generates about 11,000 pieces of paper a year. But it is the tracking and the identity of all of these pieces, and then the regulatory approval documents that must go with that part or component of an aircraft, that has a lot of constraints. Right now, they're literally physical pieces of paper. By creating ecosystems where you're actually able to securely share that information, you're sharing access to the information, but not necessarily moving the data around. That's some of the values that the decentralized technologies bring to bear. When you look from an ecological standpoint, some might say, "Oh, blockchains are terrible." From a computation or power, certainly Bitcoin and Ethereum have a little bit of large energy consumers. But there are other technologies, and there's changes that are continuing to happen in the technology space that will change that over time as well. So I think that. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I know I stepped in your word. I thought I was too quick.
No, so I think that looking at it, I mean, the idea of being able to securely share this information between all members in an ecosystem is some of the value that the decentralized technologies bring to bear today, that quite frankly didn't exist 5-10 years ago, right? And so we might have wanted to do it, but we couldn't do it because the technology hadn't been invented yet.
Thank you very much for that, Michael. I know, Andreas, that this is something that you are dealing with as well. Your organization deals with much more than that of what you discussed. Perhaps if you could briefly describe to what degree Saubermacher is actually dealing with some of the things that Michael was talking about.
So what we see is that more and more producers, industries are thinking about that problem, that they currently create an input into our waste stream that is not very, very beneficial. And the consumers, because the question was there before, the consumers start to like products more that are also from a waste part more positive. So that's why industry starts to change. And we see a lot of projects going on where these input streams get optimized. Yes, when I say a lot of, it's maybe a couple of % of the industries, but this number increases steadily over the last years. So I think that this is on a good way. It needs to be accelerated, and the technology that you can use for optimizing this process is a lot better now, because you can create and work with data a lot more than maybe 10 or 15 years ago. So having tools that show your waste streams, that show your products in a digital stream, how they end up in some different waste situations, I think that's good, and that should be used.
Okay, no, thank you very much for that. There were a number of questions, and I apologize to all of you who are participating today if indeed I'm not able to get to your questions. So I'm trying to synthesize some of these concepts, and there's one very predominant one coming out from Michael Drade, where he actually went ahead and posed individual questions, but I'm going to try to synthesize that. And this is tied to those things we're talking about, those physical elements that we know and we can actually go ahead and trace. But one of the issues that we have is actually going ahead and avoiding them being created to begin with. So if we're trying to eliminate waste, it's best if they're not created, because then you don't have to deal with that. Any thoughts from any of you of how we can use technology to go ahead and track the hypothetical, what it could have been had we not gone ahead and followed a route? Any thoughts? Leave it to any of you.
Can I have a very brief comment?
Please, Andreas, yes. Mm-hmm.
I think one of the key aspects is that we use technology for more sharing of things, buying a more expensive, long-lasting product and then share it, because of course it's more expensive, and finding also commercial models to get some money back for this expensive product. I think technology can help us a lot to make this process better, and certain things are already there, but this should get broader and broader. And the second thing is that, for example, if you have your washing machine for your clothes at home, that the things really start to be a usage model, and allowing the usage to be built to the customer, which again makes the producers much more motivated to produce everlasting washing machines, which they currently don't do.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting because that's a change of behavior, right? You go back, there was growing up in North America, there was a very famous, to pick the washing machine, Andreas, as an example, there was the Maytag repairman, and it was a famous ad campaign that ran for years of the Maytag washer was built so well and so reliably, it never broke. And so he was the loneliest repairman on the planet because he never got a call. And that was a change. That was a change. I don't know when exactly, it'd be hard to draw a line, but I'd say probably in the 80s, it started to change, where the idea of building products for reliability and long durability shifted to be saying, well, wait a second, if we build these products, we reduce the cost of building the product, we build it so that it wears out within 5-10 years, depending on the particular product, you have to buy a new one. And so I think that some of that effort you're seeing now in the right to repair efforts that are going on here in Europe, I think that, and it will take time, I would say, to work through the financial models, because if you now, either through regulation, require higher reliability, longer durability, that changes the performance models of all these businesses. And so, what does that, what implication does that have?
Yeah, I tend to think, Michael. Oh, sorry, Katarina, please.
Yeah, I would like to add and thank Michael for the comment, because I would like to pick up on his point. Circular economy in the very DNA is about waste prevention in many ways. First, as Michael said, as soon as we start producing products which are designed to last longer, to have more quality in place, to have better material, we immediately switch into the less resources, less products to be pulled to the market, the cheap ones. Of course, we're reducing waste. On the level of design, I would like to bring the topic of the digital twin and blockchain technology. As soon as we start providing the information about the materials which we are making the product from, we are equipping our stakeholders with data which it was not possible to do before. That was a problem of waste. It was not really possible to understand what the product is consisting of, what material is made of. So now, when we are switching to the digitalized economy and digital solutions which are facilitating the certain technologies, definitely we have better understanding for what can be recycled, what cannot. We are diminishing waste by that. And at the level of design, of course, one of the purposes of the circular economy is to get rid of the mixed unrecyclable materials, so toxic materials. So as soon as we start providing more data, we create more incentives to invest in a new circular economy solution, something that was not possible before. So it's like mutually upgrading. Digitalization is getting the benchmark from the circular economy, what has to be done. And Industry 4.0 is providing the way of doing the things. So this waste prevention argument that Michael, we know each other from before as well, is bringing, I have a doubt that waste prevention itself can be a separate concept. It is in the DNA of the circular economy, and Industry 4.0 is really supporting to walk this talk. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Katarina. And as you might have noticed that there were some others that very much appreciated your comments, so I thought I would just go ahead and highlight that.
Can I throw one more comment in there,
please,
Michael?
of course, yes.
Yeah. I think the other part is that we all have to look in the mirror, right? Manufacturers and you know, it's some of our own behaviors, and so it's, you know, updating, whether it's, you know, updating your smartphone every 2 years because the newest, latest, and greatest things is there. There's a lot of behaviors that and conveniences that we all take advantage of, right? And it's easy to throw all of the manufacturers and saying that they're all the bad people, but really, and not look in the mirror ourselves. So I do think that there are things that we have to do ourselves, and it may mean that it's not so. It does fall into product design as well, back, because it doesn't mean that you have to do with less or to not take some of the benefits of technology and changes, but maybe looking at things and saying, do I need to replace my smartphone every 2 years? Do I have to do some of these things? Is that really a good use? Or, you know, I think so. We're both part of the solution and part of the problem.
That's right. And there's a podcast I listen to, 538, where they always talk about good use of polling or bad use of polling. And I'm going to go ahead and take a twist on that and say good use of economy or bad use of economy. And I think that definitely applies to that of what you were talking about, Michael. There was one thing I just wanted to quickly interject to something you said earlier. You were saying that change took place in the 80s with the lonely repairmen. And I tend to think that you were right, because Claire Christensen was talking about that change that we made looking at the short-term gains or concentrating on IRR, internal rate of return. And I wonder really if maybe there might be a correlation between the loss of the lonely repairman and our fixation, and I would even say our dependence on IRR. But that might be a subject perhaps for another live stream, and we will leave it as that. We are reaching the witching hour, folks, so I'd like to go ahead and give you an opportunity if there are any closing comments you'd like to go ahead and make. I'd like to, before I get it, I want to make sure that I have given an opportunity to thank all of you who have put in some great comments, and I apologize if indeed I was not able to go ahead and highlight. I tried as best as I could to bring some of the comments on the screen, so please forgive me if I was not able to go ahead and raise your question or perhaps highlight your comments, but I'm very appreciative of all the great feedback we've been receiving from our audience today. So thank you for that. So perhaps Andreas, if you'd like to go ahead and leave some closing words from your perspective.
Yes, adding to the last comment from Michael, I think we have shifted to be a throwaway society since the 80s, and this links to many things. When you look at the shopping centers, people just like to shop and buy things. So for them, it's good if they can throw it away a year later and buy a new one. But I think that's where regulation and also the political guidance has to bring a new shift into our thinking and into our society, because that cannot go on. And I think that's should be the aim of the next 10 or 20 years.
Right. Did I hear 5 or maybe 2.5? Michael, perhaps if I could give you an opportunity.
No. Well, first off, thank you for Michael, for inviting me to speak today. It's continual action. I think it's a lot of little baby steps, and I think that we get there. I don't think there'll be any large single activity, but sort of the continual change. And I think the other part, to add a little bit onto what Andreas said, it's also the changing of the social expectation, of what is considered socially acceptable. And there's examples of that, of things like using a seatbelt in a car, or not drinking and driving, things of that nature, where it takes a lot of time. But I think that's start of those starts of movements become far more effective in using that type of social acceptable behavior.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Michael. And I have to go ahead and admit that you were talking about smoking and putting your seatbelt on, but unfortunately, you know me quite well that I need a seatbelt before I start drinking. But in any case, we'll go ahead and leave the stage to you, Katerina, to have our last word.
I would like to bring us to the very initial point about the role of value chains in circular economy transition and the role of industry for technologies. We need a new resource model, and this new resource model needs to be facilitated by the technological advancement in order for us to achieve the economic system which is inclusive, fair, fair environmentally, socially, and economically. So value chains, they play a crucial role in this shift, since they coordinate the material flows which still reproduce the linear logic. So we need to shift to the different circular logic in our in producing and redistributing the value and maintaining this value in the system. So value chains will be the underlying focus for the next decade, and I think we will discover many important technological solutions and new management practices along creation of the value chains. Thank you so much for your attention and for this live talk.